Hello everyone and welcome to Vakilaw, Know the Law. I am Shivani and in today's session we are beginning with a new subject which is the Indian Contract Act of 1872. This is my personally very favorite subject and this subject basically falls into the category of mercantile law. So those students who fall into the category of commerce stream must have in their career went through the concept of mercantile law. But those who don't know, let me introduce you basically to the concept of mercantile law. So basically understand that mercantile law or commercial law is the law which falls for businesses or any type of trade. Now let me give you a technical definition of mercantile law. So mercantile law is that branch of law which applies to rights, relations and conduct of persons and businesses, where such persons or businesses are engaged in commerce or merchandising, trade or sales. Mercantile law is also considered to be that branch of civil laws and deals with public as well as private laws. Now moving towards the subject of the Indian Contract Act 1872, I will be conducting sessions where I'll be taking an overview of the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So in today's session, we'll be taking a bird's eye view of all the provisions and sections which have been incorporated in the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So today we will specifically focus on the concept of contracts and what are the elements of contracts. Also, I will be discussing a brief history of the Contract Act in India. Also, we will take a look at the importance and significance of contracts in India. So, let's begin with the concept of contracts. So, let's begin with the concept of contract. So, very basically, a contract is a voluntary agreement between two or more parties which is enforceable by law as a binding legal agreement. Now understand that this definition or the concept of contract has the following key points. So as I said, what is a contract? So basically contract is a voluntary agreement. Which voluntary? Between whom? So it's between two or more parties. So it's a requirement for a contract that there should be two or more parties who voluntarily agree, and such contract is enforceable by law. How? That it is a binding legal agreement. So it's a voluntary agreement between two or more persons which is enforceable by law and is binding legal agreement. Now moving to yet another concept of contract, it says that contract is a branch of law of obligations in jurisdictions of the civil law traditions. So these are the two key points in this concept where it states that it is a branch of law of obligations in jurisdictions of the civil law traditions. So contract law mainly is concerned with the rights and duties that arise from an agreement. So agreement is a different concept and contract is a different concept. What is the difference between agreement and contract? We'll be taking a look at it in the upcoming session. But for now, you need to understand that an agreement which defines the rights and duties of the parties who are concerned to that particular agreement is a contract which has a legal enforceability. So, a contract arises when A. the parties agree that B. there is an agreement. So, now moving towards the elements of contracts. So, understand that there are four major elements of a valid contract. So, the very first element is an offer, second one is acceptance, third one is intention to create legal relationship, and fourth one is consideration. We will be considering all these four elements in my later sessions relating to the Indian Contract Act. Now moving forward, let's take a look at the history of contracts in India. So how did the concept of contract, or how the Indian Contract Act was enacted in India, was brought into force in the Indian laws, is what we are going to see now. So basically, the Indian Contract Act of 1872 prescribes the law relating to contracts in India. The Indian Contract Act was passed in 1872, so it's very obvious that it was passed during the British era. The Indian Contract Act is based on the principles of English common law. The Indian Contract Act determines the circumstances in which promises made by the parties to a contract shall be legally binding, and the enforcement of rights and duties that are conferred to the parties by this act. Now this point also enumerates the role of contracts in India. So basically, the Indian Contract Act, what does it do? So it determines the circumstances or the situations in which promises that are made between the parties who are concerned with that particular agreement or contract shall be legally binding. So they will have a legal obligation against the promise that they have made, and the enforcement of rights and duties. So whatever rights and duties that arise as a part of the agreement or contract will be enforced, legally enforced, that are conferred to the parties by this act. So the rights and duties which naturally occur as a course of business between the parties, which have been enumerated and conferred by this act, shall be legally binding on the parties. This is the key role that has been played by the Indian Contract Act of 1872. Alright, so moving forward, let us now understand the importance or significance of contract law, or specifically the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So in our day-to-day life, we make numerous transactions. We purchase something, we sell something, we promise someone to perform something against something in return. Like for example, if we go to purchase milk, so what we do, we offer money to that person with an intent to purchase the milk carton or milk pouch. Against that money, the vendor provides us with that milk carton or pouch. This is a transaction. So in our day-to-day life, we make such transactions, but we don't make any paperwork or legal documentation for such transactions, because these are considered to be very much petty. But for large businesses or large organizations, mere oral agreements or mere oral promises for transactions won't work. All of the monetary issues and goodwill that have been attached to that particular business or organizations will be at stake if there is no proper documentation, no proper intention, or no proper paperwork made. So if there is only a mere promise and there is no intention of creating any kind of legal relationship, or even if you have an intention to create a legal relationship but you don't have a proper written agreement where the parties mutually agree to the terms of the contract, it is of no use. So here the law of contracts play a very important role. Here the law of contracts defines the rights and duties of the concerned parties and also provide for elements, conditions and rules, or a legal framework for a valid contract. So what are the conditions? How are they to be fulfilled? Whether a contract falls into all the norms that have been formulated under this Indian Contract Act. When all of these conditions are fulfilled, then your contract will be legally binding, and the rights and duties that have been conferred under this act will be applicable to both the parties. And if any one of the party breaches any of the terms of such contracts, then you can ask for any kind of remedy that has been formulated here, and you can get compensation for the damages that is caused due to non-performance of that contract. But basically you need to understand that you need to fulfill all the provisions, all the conditions, all the rules that have been formulated by the Indian Contract Act for your contract to be legally binding, so that if there is any kind of mishap or any kind of non-performance of contract, you can certainly enter the court of law to ask for any kind of damages or compensation that has been caused due to non-performance of that particular contract. So here is where the Contract Act plays a key role. Okay, so now we've understood the concept or the meaning of the term contract. So now let's take an overview of the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So it's now very clear that contracts create legal rights and obligations between the parties. The law of contract is mainly concerned with legal enforcement of such rights and obligations. So basically the Indian Contract Act it also stipulates the rights and obligations which the parties have to follow, or which the rights the parties has for the contract that he has made. And when all these conditions or all the requirements for a valid contract are fulfilled, then the role of Contract Act begins, and there you can get a legal enforcement, and you can also get a protection against any kind of mishaps or any kind of non-performance that may take place in the contract. So if the contract moves on smoothly, both the parties perform their part properly, proper consideration is paid, or both the parties intend to create a legal relationship, or even the motive of the contract is also valid, no any problem will arise, everything will go smoothly. But if any party is non-capable or does not deliberately perform any part of his promise, here the Indian Contract Act certainly will provide you protection and will also provide you with the remedies for such non-performance, where you can get compensation for the damages that has been caused. We will discuss about it in the later sessions. So the Indian Contract Act came into force on the 1st of September in 1872. The main feature of the Indian Contract Act is that it deals with the general principles governing the contracts. The Indian Contract Act is basically formulated in two parts. The first part deals with the general principles, and the second part deals with specific kinds of contracts. So such contracts can be contracts of indemnity, guarantee, bailment, pledge and agency. Now it is also very important to note that Indian Contract Act of 1872 is the main source of law which regulates contracts in India. So the Indian Contract Act of 1872 is the only act till date which governs all provisions which are related to contracts in India. Indian Contract Act is Act number 9 of 1872, which is enacted by the Imperial Legislative Council. Now moving forward, let's take a look at the structure of the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So the Indian Contract Act of 1872 is Act number 9 of 1872. Sections 1 to 75 of the Indian Contract Act deal with the general principles of law of contract. Sections 76 to 123 deal with contracts relating to sale of goods. Sections 124 to 238 deals with special contracts, that is contracts of indemnity, guarantee, bailment and pledge. And sections 239 to 266 of the Indian Contract Act of 1872 deals with contracts relating to partnership. So as we've seen the structure of the act basically consists of 266 sections in total. But rapid development and modernization of business and changing business world went much higher and ahead of the provisions that have been stipulated in the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So it created insufficiency of provisions which could not prove to be competent to the changing scenario. A change in the same provisions was the need of the hour. So eradication of such incompetency began with the birth of two new acts. First one was the Sale of Goods Act of 1930 and second one was the Partnership Act of 1932. Enactment of the Sale of Goods Act of 1930 and the Partnership Act of 1932 affected the Indian Contract Act of 1872, that the provisions of sale of goods and partnership, which were firstly enacted in the previous act of Indian Contract Act of 1872, were repealed, and these provisions were then shifted towards the Sale of Goods Act and the Indian Partnership Act respectively. So presently, the Indian Contract Act has 10 chapters and 238 sections in total. That's all for today. I hope you are satisfied with the information that I have provided. If you have any queries, please feel free to mention them in the comments box. I will certainly help you to solve your problems. In the upcoming video, we will be discussing about the arrangement of sections and the salient features of the Indian Contract Act of 1872. So till then, stay tuned to Vakilaw, Know the Law. If you like my videos, please do like and share my videos, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel Vakilaw, Know the Law. Till then, this is me Shivani signing off. Stay tuned to Vakilaw. Bye bye.